Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast. And we continue on with our series on cleansing and detoxification, clearing our pathways to health. And today, joining us is author Rebecca Ward. And Rebecca authored the book called The Paper Tiger Syndrome: How to Liberate Yourself from the Illusion of Fear. Rebecca is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She specializes in grief and loss, trauma, stress reduction, and the psychological symptoms associated with chronic and terminal illness. She's certified in a number of different treatment therapies and modalities, including somatic experiencing. She's an ICF professional certified coach and an expert in leadership presence and embodiment, connecting the works of somatics with the use of language and communication. And today I thought it would be really fun to bring Rebecca on because I went through her book, which I think is a really beautiful book. I think everybody can, I'll put a link to that at the end here. But I want to talk about fear and the idea of how do we detoxify from fear? What is fear? What's going on? And how do we work with it? So, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Well, how about I just start by telling you a little bit about my story? Would that be
Yeah, I
helpful?
think that's a great idea. Yeah, because whenever people come to write a book like you've written,
Mhm.
that usually comes from some angle of personal experience. Personal experience, and usually then tied from that, we extrapolate that out to the people that we work with. So yeah, I'd love to hear the whole story for everybody.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just give you sort of the highlights. Most of what I talk about in the book regarding fear are things that I have personally gone through myself. Before I was a therapist, before I had another career before I became a therapist, and in those years, I went through a tremendous amount of trauma, all the way from my childhood up until my mid to late 30s. And some of them were shock traumas, some of them were developmental traumas. I've experienced just about the most profound kind of grief you can experience in my 30s and my 20s. With the beginning of a really an unexpected loss of losing my father when I was 20 in college. Who That relationship was complicated. We didn't have a great relationship when I was growing up. So I came out of childhood with a lot of developmental trauma. And we had 2 really good years at the end. And thank goodness for that. But it was a very abrupt loss. There was no warning when he passed. So I was very traumatized. And it really took me, because I didn't know any better. This is one of the reasons why I wrote the book. I didn't know any better. I did the best I could in my 20s and 30s, trying to navigate life, and essentially came out the other side realizing that all I'd been doing was surviving. I wasn't really enjoying my life. I was living a life that wasn't mine. I chose a career that wasn't one I wanted. Why? Because I was afraid to take risks. I lost my sense of self in losing what I believed was, fathers are meant to be protectors, right? And when your protector leaves you, you start to think, I did at least, started to think about, how can I create a life that is stable? How can I create stability in my life without him here? And so I created a life that really wasn't mine. And for 20 years, I held on to all of that grief, married somebody who was very much like my father, recreated those patterns from childhood, as we do when we're unconscious of our patterns, right? And in that culminated in a very traumatic marriage and the loss of my boys. I became pregnant with twin boys, carried them through my third trimester and lost them. They were born alive and I had them for a few hours. It was significant. I just want to say to the folks who have been through trauma themselves, look at me now. Everything turned out just fine. It's always important to say that when you're talking about trauma, right? So it all worked out. I'm okay. I'm healthy, but I've been through a lot. I've been through cancer several times after that. And I think, going back to that piece that you were talking about with detoxifying, when we hold on to our emotions, which I did, I repressed my grief, I repressed anger, I repressed, shame. I felt ashamed when I lost my kids. I blamed myself. And I didn't process any of those emotions. And when we don't process emotions, what happens is those emotions turn in on themselves. They go into the body and create toxicity in the system. And so my cancers are directly correlated to grief. I lost, my children, and the places where you hold children. I contracted cancer. I contracted the same cancer my father had. So it's clearly in my case. These are extreme examples, but when we don't process our emotions in healthy ways, it may not be cancer, but it'll be something. The system can only tolerate so much of that energy being turned inside ourselves. So it's very important that we regulate our emotions, that we learn to regulate our emotions. And that was really the main reason why I wanted to write this book, was to help people avoid some of the things that I did in my life, and I learned, unfortunately, some of the more hard ways of learning a lesson like that.
I mean, I can't even imagine, Rebecca. Those are intense ones. And I just finished talking with another another trauma therapist earlier
Mhm.
today for this series. And one of the things that she was talking about that I think ties very much with what you were just saying is after going through that, you basically were living in survival. You were surviving, but not really living. And what she
Mhm.
was talking about as well is that trauma very much shrinks our life. I feel like what it does is we end up walking around in this bubble of just trying to be whatever our semblance of sort of safety and security can be without because we've got no buffer. We've got almost no buffer to manage. And I think we'll go into that a little bit as we move along here with what's actually going on in the nervous system too, that
Mhm.
shows you also that it's not just something up here. It's the
That's
whole
right.
nervous system, it's the whole body. I think you made a really profound statement too when you talked about holding emotions and not processing them, and that literally becomes toxicity. This is such an important thing because I think this is where we start to look at the blending of these different bodies of health.
Mhm.
We are so used to thinking about things from just this physical body and this physical
Mhm.
construct and looking for physical reasons for things that develop. But
Mhm.
when we look at this from another perspective, you've heard me talk about a lot of times this vital body, which is the sort of field above the physical body,
Mhm.
is the world of emotions. And how we talk about it is emotions are related to this morphogenic field, which literally is like the blueprint for the cellular body. So
That's
when
right.
we have this buildup of these sort of long-standing intense emotions, they affect that blueprint, which then affects the physical body. And
Yes.
you
Yeah,
got to sort of see it from both sides. You got to see how it creates things, and you also see how you can heal from it as well.
that's right. Exactly. Yeah. And I also had a lot of gut health issues for most of my life, all related to trauma, developmental trauma. Whenever you have gut health issues, not always, but oftentimes it is developmental trauma. It's early developmental trauma. That system, you've got this vagus nerve, which I talk about in the book. It's the largest bundle of nerves in the body, and where it is most connected is in your gut. And your gut is where we hold 95% of our serotonin, which regulates digestion and mood. So when that system and that vagus nerve is dysregulated, it is absolutely going to cause a lot of gut health issues, which I have repaired over time. But it took a long time for me to heal that part of myself. And it's all that toxicity in the system that often has to do with trauma.
Gut health issues are huge. So many people deal with gut health issues.
Hmm.
And we'll get into the nervous system part of this in a bit because vagus nerve's a big deal.
Hmm.
And even if you just look at the gut health, it's like even, when you think about what do they usually tell you when you're supposed to sit down and eat a meal? It's like be quiet, focus on your meal, eat
Right.
slowly. Like all of this stuff is set up in this rest and digest parasympathetic response. That's the way the nervous system is supposed to be in.
Yes.
If you've been in trauma and you're not very regulated in that rest
Hmm.
and digest part and you're in
Right.
fight or flight or aspects of that, then you're constantly changing the way that your body is supposed to process. So I mean, what happens physiologically then? It usually changes the acidity in your stomach. It changes peristalsis. It changes your
Yes,
ability to create pancreatic enzymes. Like all of this stuff release
that's
bile.
right.
So then it has this physiological repercussions that downplay from that first start in
Mhm.
the emotions.
That's right.
Rebecca, how do you define fear? What is fear,
Mm,
and why is there so much of it? Because I
yeah,
really do think like this is really a major epidemic. I mean, everybody, and I would say even more and more, particularly even over the past couple of years, I think it's just been heightened that much more. So from your perspective,
yeah,
what is fear, and what's going on? Why is it so
yeah.
ingrained in us?
Well, yeah, and I will say too that oftentimes we are not designed to notice fear. That's how the nervous system functions. We aren't supposed to always be aware of our fears, but it dates back to our ancestors. You know, our ancestors had to rely on our primitive wiring that really hasn't changed since then. We still have our primitive wiring, a nervous system that is wired to identify threat or identify in the modern world negativity, so that's the same thing. And when we're out in the world, that system is the first stop, the first default for all of us. That system is unconsciously looking for threat. And fear can show up in a variety of different ways that we don't necessarily identify as fear. So I give people questions to ask themselves. Is fear running your life? Here are a few examples of those questions. Have you ever hesitated to have a hard conversation with somebody? Right? That's a fear. It doesn't feel safe for me to speak up. I might lose connection with that person. That's fear. Am I afraid of a recession? Am I afraid of losing my job? These are fears that don't justify a system that goes into threat. It's not going to serve you, right? These are examples of different ways or fear of aging. That's another one, the fear of death or aging or feeling like we're no longer relevant. These are fears that we hold, right? And even though those fears may be relevant, they don't justify a threat reaction in the system. We don't want that system. We only want that nervous system to respond when it's a real threat. So those are fight, flight, and freeze. The autonomic nervous system steps in, takes over for you when it's a real threat. We need that. But in the modern world, that is so rare for most of us, not all of us, but for many of us. That autonomic nervous system really doesn't need to kick in, and it's misfiring all the time. It affects big and small decisions about where we live, who we marry, what careers we choose, who we vote for. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And if you just turn on the news, you can see how human beings are wired for threat. It's always the bad news.
Mhm.
It's all, and that baits us in because fear is really a cheap marketing tool.
Yeah.
It is the easiest way to lure people into feeling afraid. Much harder to connect with people through through a regulated nervous system.
So how did that system then get so misfired?
Mm,
Why does it get paired? Something that should not technically have such an intense fear response, but probably more set us in place for a specific action or something to do to correct something that maybe isn't working so well. But why does it
right,
get paired so quickly to this over exaggerated autonomic response to it?
right. Well, again, that's a default response, right? And we in the modern world, we don't have an awareness of how much that's running us. We think that, a lot of the social conditioning about what is and isn't appropriate. Animals don't do that. Other animals have this innate ability to shake off fear, to shake off stress. They don't have a prefrontal cortex that causes them to question what they're about to do. They just do it. It's an innate ability. We have lost our ability to do that so effectively, for a variety of reasons, mainly because those primitive responses aren't appropriate in our modern world. So we have to find other ways to do that. And the tools and practices in the book help people regulate their nervous system so they're not so intensely biased towards threat. And
Mhm.
then there's the developmental piece, right? That Those are beyond fight, flight, and freeze. There are the classic five, those three: fight, flight, and freeze, part of developmental trauma, but also shame and attachment issues that kids, they use those five strategies in childhood as a default. We're not wired, we don't have the access to our left brain or higher order thinking hasn't fully formed yet until we're in our mid-20s. So when you're a kid, you have your primary access is to your right brain, your limbic system, the amygdala, and your emotions. And that's how you navigate childhood until that left brain catches up in your mid-20s. We are all wired with these classic five survival strategies. When I've added two more, appease and scarcity, that also, when we're growing up, those strategies work well for us. They help us navigate childhood. But as we get older, if there's been some kind of disruption, some trauma that disrupts that development, we're still relying on those old strategies. And what we need to do is upgrade that. We need to learn new coping skills and put those in place to resolve a lot of the developmental trauma that happens to us in childhood.
Yeah, I would like it if you could go through that one a little bit more detail for people, just so they can see because you kind of break it down in two different perspectives, kind of from the childhood perspective and then
Yes.
from an adult perspective that's
Yeah.
actually more designed to help us build resilience.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us sort of an example and walk us through those?
Yeah,
And then
sure.
the other thing I'm curious about is just around the shame and the guilt process around that, because
Mm,
from my understanding, like kids, that's not a natural response to feel shame or guilt. I feel like that's something that gets sort of learned. I feel like almost through parenting and stuff like that, it comes up at some point. I'm thinking like my kids. My kids, I don't think naturally they would do something. They don't really feel shameful or guilty for it until they're made to feel shameful or guilty for it, and then it becomes something that sort of gets mixed together and sort of learned. So I'm curious
mm.
about your perspective around that as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so there are what I call childhood developmental stressors. And there's the classic five, which is the fight, flight, freeze, submit, or shame, and attach. These are the five strategies that some of my predecessors developed. And I added two more: appease and scarcity. And as an example, when we're growing up, I'll use your example. So shame. When right around the age of 5, plus or minus a year or two, we step into the first phase of what we call egocentrism. It's all about me. It's all about me. It comes back when you're in teenage years. And when you're in that initial phase, that means that everything is about you. The world, your understanding of how you fit into the world is you're in the center of everything. So if mom and dad get a divorce, for example, kids will say, it must be me. It must be me. I must have caused this. That's shame. And or you grow up with a father who's an alcoholic, like I did. Everybody rotates around the alcoholic when you're a child, and you find a role. Usually, it's like appease, or it must be me. I did something wrong, or you get angry. You use the fight response. We all play roles and systems to survive. And we internalize that. We internalize everything at that age as if it's all about me. It's all my fault. Dad is an alcoholic because it's me. I'm causing him to drink. Or my parents are divorcing because of me. So that's shame. We internalize the world around us as if everything is our fault. Right? But that of course isn't true. And what if those conversations with mom and dad don't happen, which they often don't, because kids don't have the language skills to communicate what's going on with them. So oftentimes things get missed. Parents are busy. It's not necessarily an abusive environment that can cause developmental trauma. It's simple things like mom and dad had to work. They couldn't be there as much as they wanted to be, right? And children will conclude things on their own and not talk about it. So we grow up with these ideas of what happened to us, and that memory isn't necessarily accurate. That doesn't mean it's still not true. What our memories tell us is the part that you want to work with, whether it's true or not. And so shame healthy shame. There's healthy shame, healthy fight, healthy flight. So I then created another section called adult examples of resilience in all of those categories. So there are examples of what I call healthy fight. And healthy fight is actually how you move out of shame as adults. You start to advocate for
Yeah.
yourself. You set boundaries. You trust your instincts. These are examples of healthy fight. I speak up. I don't shrink down. I don't get small and avoid conflict. I lean in. And as a whole methodology around that to help people overcome their traumas from childhood. So as an example, if you were brought up in a home where you stayed quiet, you just internalize the shame. The way out of that is to go back to that memory, to call forward the memory and be in conversation with that part of you. You stay present in your adult mind and you work with that shame that was a need that didn't get met, conversation that didn't get had. And you are the best person to heal yourself because you know precisely what didn't get said. You know precisely what you didn't get from your parent. And you can look to the relationships in your present life to know exactly what those things are, because that's what you're asking from other people. And it may be too much a tall order to ask of someone else to know exactly what you need to hear. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. I think that's
Yeah.
actually really good. Um, One thing that you had mentioned there was you talked about trusting instincts as part of
Mm.
that movement towards more adulthood resiliency.
Yeah.
One thing that I think is a really good topic to get into is around how do we start to rebuild that trust? Because a lot of times I mean, gosh, it doesn't even have to be severe traumas, but you can have different things that have happened where, either you ignored the body or the body tried to say something and you misinterpreted it or didn't pay attention to it. And now you've literally created like a disconnect from the body. And one thing that I'm always sort of curious about discerning is, when is my body telling me something that is innate wisdom that I'm supposed to take heed of and listen
Mm-hmm.
to, versus when is it coming from more of a conditioned response from
Mm-hmm.
something that maybe is not actually taking me in the best direction?
Mm-hmm.
How do you discern those two things, and how do you rebuild that trust again once it's been
Mm.
compromised?
Well, I mean, the place to start is to actually get in touch with your body. It's what we call interoception, the mind's ability to notice the body. That medial prefrontal cortex, which is the observing part of the brain, observing what's happening in the body. That practice is essential to know the difference, to make the distinction between the two. If we don't have access to the sensations in our bodies, we can't know, we can't trust our instincts because we don't have access to them. We can't identify or discern between our wise adult selves and a response that is outsized from what's actually happening. If something is outsized, that's a great way to know that there's something else going on. There's something more happening here. If we have a catastrophic thought, we're shutting down. There may be some developmental trauma there that we have to look at. I often say to people, if you start to feel yourself not being fully present, there's something else going on. Fear has you, right? It's hijacked you. And we have to just notice for just a moment that I don't have access to my sensations. I can't feel my feet. I can't notice my heart beating or the breath in my chest or my throat here, or something that tells you there is no sensation. I've cut myself off, which is so easy to happen because there's nothing part of our Western world, I'll make that distinction, that rewards being in your body. We're rewarded for this, not connection to the body. But the truth is that if you practice this, if you have more connection between the two, you are far more compelling. You will thrive in your life because that nervous system isn't channeling energy away from all these critical organs doing what they're supposed to do and focusing on a false threat, a paper tiger. We don't need that. That system will compromise your immune system to fight off disease. And that's a big problem in the United States. 2/3 of all Americans have some underlying health condition. which you can say is at least in part due to fear, to stress, to anxiety, to overwhelm, to burnout.
Well, and whether that's directly because of the effects that it has on the person's physiology, or if because it then sets in motion different choices and decisions that we make that set us up. We don't make very good decisions when we're in a place of fight or flight versus when we're in rest and digest. I mean, it's that's a fact. I mean, even all the work by Heart Math Institute and heart brain coherence and whatnot,
Oh, yeah,
you don't make good decisions when you are not in a coherent place. I know even for
absolutely.
my wife and I, if we're ever having to make some pretty major decisions around stuff, we will make sure that we are in a certain state, even measure it to make sure we're there. And
Yes.
a lot of times you'll find that your answers to things are very different than they were when you weren't in that state.
Yes, most definitely. I can name a number of things in my own life that if not that I have regrets, they've all informed who I am today. But boy, the level of insight I have now about all of that because I am mostly present, those decisions would have been different for sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's amazing.
it is amazing. When you know those moments where if you I'm sure you've had these moments, we all do, where you think to yourself, if I just had said that in the moment, but I just, darn it, I didn't think about it. Well, that's normal. That's exactly what happens when we're under threat or when the system gets dysregulated. That amygdala is back in charge. You don't have access to your higher order thinking. That's a dysregulated nervous system. And you have to practice regulation. It's not something that's just going to change overnight.
Hmm.
Then you will be in those places and you can stay in it and you can say what you need to say
Hmm.
because that part of you is back open again.
Yeah, and that's what ultimately gives you the resilience to work with life in a very different way. And when you've got
Yes,
that resilience, you interact with life differently. It's
that's
when
right.
I remember being at a retreat with someone named Pema Chodron, who was
Oh,
a
yeah.
Buddhist nun,
Yeah, yeah.
and she was a
Yeah.
big teacher for us for a long time. And she talked about it in the idea that she's saying, picture if your life is the size of, like a closet, and you're in the closet and someone opens up the door and puts in a Bengal tiger. Well, that situation is going to be terrifying.
Yes.
But she said, now imagine if your life was like the size of, say, 3 football fields large, and you're up on the top of the bleachers, and someone on the other side lets in the Bengal tiger, and then
Yeah,
you can watch it from back there with your binoculars. The situation's the same. A tiger comes into your room, but
yes.
because of the size of your life, you now, instead of having a fear response, maybe you can look at it and see the beauty in the situation. Maybe you can see the way that they're moving and the texture and the colors and sort of appreciate it in a very different
That's
way.
right.
And so I always think about that whenever I'm having certain reactions to things. I'm wondering, if my life was bigger in certain aspects, how could I perceive that differently?
Yes, you just did that with your hands. That's more capacity.
Hmm.
So when I use this Hoberman sphere to explain it. Have you seen this before? This is a regulated nervous system, sympathetic, parasympathetic. And when the system's operating the way it's supposed to, there's nice, even regulation. We're in our window of resilience. But when we go through a trauma, it either constricts or it expands beyond our capacity. And what you want is a system that's regulated. That big open space that you talked about is more capacity. If you're stuck in the closet with that Bengal tiger, all of your trauma has you. There's no capacity inside that closet. You're just in pure fear, right? And what you want is to build capacity so that trauma becomes something really small and manageable inside that bigger container of yourself, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that analogy too. It,
Mhm.
it it really helpful for people to have visuals for that stuff too, because it's like when you show them that, it gives them a representation of that expansion or constriction
Yeah.
within the body, and
Yeah.
lets them then pay attention again to that feeling sense that's going on.
That's right.
Now, you
That's
talked
right.
earlier, you talked about the importance of feelings
Mm.
and of actually feeling our
Hmm.
feelings.
Hmm.
So Maybe walk us through a little bit about the process of feeling feelings, especially when those feelings are really uncomfortable and scary, and we
Mhm.
actually would rather run away and avoid them rather than
Mhm.
feel them. So,
Yeah.
why is it important to feel the feelings, and how much is enough? What's too much?
Mhm. Well, first of all, you'll know because if you can feel a feeling, it's the sensation of your emotions are in your body. You can think a feeling that is not actually experiencing the sensation of the emotion. That's a real feeling. I can feel joy in my heart space or love in my heart space, gratitude or fear or anxiety. We'll know then what to do with it. If you've used these some of the tools and practices that I have in my book, you'll learn to work with your emotions in ways that are regulated, right? Even grief, we have this funny relationship with grief, myself included. I certainly did. That there's just so much there's so much I can feel. And in the acute stages of grief, that is important. We want the nervous system to protect us from feeling too much in the acute stage of grief. But if we hold that for too long, then we're in freeze. We're not allowing the body to experience or process the emotions. And that's when toxicity starts to turn in on us, right? Yeah.
Yeah, very true. I remember, and I'm not sure, did you ever read a book by Candace Pert called Molecules of Emotion?
Oh, no, that's a good one though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's passed away now, but she was one of the original ones that really started it. She was actually one of the ones that discovered the opiate receptor in the body, and
Mhm.
then she
Mhm.
basically found that different emotions created all these specific peptides and neurotransmitters
Mhm.
that bound to different areas in the body.
Yeah.
And how she talked about it was that the subconscious is not up here. The body is the subconscious mind,
Mhm. That's
because
right.
this neurochemistry is stored literally throughout the whole body.
Mhm.
And we've talked about this in things like Chinese medicine has always talked about
Mhm.
different organ systems related to different emotions tied to different meridians that get literally housed in different areas of the
Mhm.
body, and different emotions being tied to these different things. How she talked about it is that it's in the process of feeling that actually allows the emotion, the molecules of emotion to be metabolized. So I actually literally picture them like dissolving. And
Yes.
it feels like that when you get to a place where you can actually stay with emotion, or like the somatic experience, how you've
Mhm.
worked with it, probably there's an ebb and a flow with it where you kind of go in and you honor your experience with it.
That's right. That's right. And you just let it go. You just let it flow through you. And
Hmm.
then the system is, we have a very intelligent system. The body is so much smarter than the mind. It knows to stay present. It knows to work and regulate itself if we pay attention. If we pay attention to it, it knows exactly what you need.
Hmm. Yeah, it's such a process of getting back into the body again and trusting it, because I really do feel like it has been, I mean, so many things that we do feels completely backwards to what we really should be doing.
Yes.
Um, I mean, so many pieces of it. Even right from the beginning, I think a lot of times with even, I think better now because there's more awareness around some of it, but
Mhm.
just disconnect from the body and what the body really wants, or been taught to kind of feel bad
Mhm.
about what the body wants, or guilty or greedy or
Mhm.
whatever it might be.
Mhm.
So it really is developing a whole new relationship with the body.
Yes. Yes. And one of the things that I also just want to mention too is that we are not islands unto ourselves. We affect the people around us. So, human beings, we're pack animals. We're not designed to be isolated. And, the last couple of years, unfortunately, has put us in that place where we don't have as much social engagement, that part of the vagus nerve that Stephen Porges talks about in
Yeah.
his polyvagal theory, how essential it is. All of the social engagement system has atrophied in the last 2 years. We've, covered half of our faces with masks, which represses our empathy neurons. We've been isolated, so we're out of practice interacting with other people. And what happens is what I call co-dysregulation, right? The systems aren't connected anymore. And it's conversely, when we're co-regulating, as we are right now, you and I, our systems are both regulated. So there's a lot of connection and social engagement happening here.
Mm.
But if we've been isolated for a long period of time, those old threat biases start to set in. They become more dominant in the way that we're interacting with people. And you can see that in society right now. People up the increase, 44% increase in crime rates have gone up. People more irritable, more agitated, more physically violent towards each other. And it is really taking our world down. And it is, I mean, this most recent tragedy in Texas is just an example of one example of that.
I think that this type of work and similar is so incredibly needed right now for, I honestly would say everybody, because I think that even if we think we're managing things well, trauma can be also very insidious and you don't even realize because we've normalized so much of it and we
Yes.
don't take it as we just kind of like got to keep moving on. Um, but I mean, there's usually telltale symptoms. I generally think look at on a regular basis of how are you feeling and what is your life showing you? And at some point, if those aren't working so well,
Mm-hmm.
we need to start to relook at this stuff and figure out, and everybody will benefit from getting back in contact with the body more.
Absolutely. And with each other.
Hmm.
We need each other. Our support systems are essential. When we isolate that like that, when we don't reach out for help and support, we can put ourselves and other people at risk. We're
Hmm.
just not designed that way. We need each other.
Yeah.
And if you look at the places around the world, the blue zones, people that live the longest, they live long because they have social connection with the people in close proximity to them. That is essential for our ability to thrive.
You know, I was at one of Bessel van der Kolk's workshops years back.
Mm-hmm.
Wrote The Body Keeps the Score, and he was talking about when they sent people out to Thailand after the tsunami, and they were trying to help people with, whatever they could do. And, you had all the companies out giving medications for everything and stuff there too. And he said, what we found was that they already had way better systems on managing trauma than we thought that we
Yeah.
could bring to them.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it, and we've talked with a lot of different cultures, even like Native American cultures too, have this way, like they would often talk about there's community and there's ceremony. And
Mm-hmm.
that combination has ingrained so much healing because a lot of these techniques we even talk about with vocalizing, they
Mm-hmm.
sing, they move their body, they dance, they have
Yeah.
community, and there's this ceremony that's that kind of allows this to unlock a little bit more organically, and it's all built within some of the cultures.
Yes. And unfortunately, in our country, we haven't valued that the way we should. And we're paying the price.
Mhm.
There's a lot of divisiveness and lack of connection between each other, and that has a direct correlation to the way we function as a society.
So,
Absolutely.
so where do we begin the healing process for it then? So for people that are dealing with a lot of fear
Hmm.
or trauma or some combination thereof, I think everybody can relate to fear anyways, because we all kind
Hmm.
of deal with that, whether
Hmm.
it's with stuff that we're dealing with on a daily basis with relationships or work
Hmm.
or health or whatever it might be. There's enough of that going around.
Hmm.
Where's the process? Where do we kind of begin with that for people that want to start to dissolve and detoxify
Yeah.
from some of the toxicity of fear?
Right. Right. Great question. Well, what I would say is in order to build resilience, we have to build capacity, and capacity starts with our support systems. And it can't just be a person. In my opinion, we also need something that has infinite capacity. So people can only provide so much support, We need something outside of ourselves that has infinite capacity. And it doesn't have to be God. In my case, it is, but other people may have other means of connecting with something that has infinite capacity, the universe, nature, the earth. There are many ways to connect with something that can hold the degree of your suffering in a way that is limitless. um, that is the place we start, is that connection to something outside of ourselves. People, but also something that has infinite capacity is the place to start. So that when something comes in, we're not holding it alone.
I love that, Rebecca. I think that's beautiful. And I think that is the starting place for almost everything. And again, like you said, whatever that is for you, but there's something that's so important with that because especially if we are in a place of fear, and if you
Mm-hmm.
think of this from like an aspect of consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
fear is a very small field of consciousness. It's a tight, restrictive field of consciousness. So you're only going to be able to go so far on your own. This is why
Yes.
even support networks like things like AA and stuff like this, one of the first things
Yes.
is to surrender it over to something
Yeah.
that can hold a larger field. It's
Mm-hmm.
within that larger field that you're going to open up the different possibilities, I think we'll even start to step in to then
Yes.
support and heal.
And it's only really in Western cultures that have this kind of funny relationship with an infinite source. Some of us are very extreme about it in one way or the other, and other people don't believe in it at all, think it's silly. I wouldn't admit that to somebody. I'm embarrassed, right? But we need to normalize that. It is we really need to look to Eastern culture to recognize that this the people in the East have it right. They really do. They understand because these are very old cultures, old civilizations that have been around for far longer than Western cultures have been. And they know that you cannot sustain health and wellness without a connection to an infinite source.
Yeah. And their systems of medicine were all based on this integration. It was all
Yes.
connected up.
Yes.
And, my wife and I, after we had had our second miscarriage at the time, we actually just left and we went to Bali and we just backpacked around for a month. We just wanted to
Mhm.
completely reset the nervous system,
Yes.
kind of clear any patterns that maybe were there that were blocking
Mm-hmm.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And our baby girl was conceived, I think, probably 3 weeks into our trip there. I think it literally took that long for the nervous system for my wife and I just to kind of settle
Yeah.
back down.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was really beautiful there is that you felt that connection to something larger within everything that was going on. Everything. And I think
Yeah.
it was what made it such a really beautiful place is everything you did, it was always a part, every day there'd be little ceremonies going on, there'd be flowers here, there'd be different things, but it was just always a part. It was a natural part of just giving thanks for everything.
Yes.
I actually
Yeah.
talked to one of our drivers that was there that we had met and that was taking us around to different places, and he said, I always find it interesting how prayer works in North America. He goes,
Mm.
usually pray when you want something. And he goes here
Yes.
he goes here we just say thanks for what we have all the
That's
time.
it.
And I just
Appreciation.
started laughing. I said,
Yes.
it's very true. It's very true.
It's so true. Yeah. I mean, that old practice, it's also in my book about manifesting. You want to start with appreciating what you have. It's like any other relationship in life. Any person in your life is the same way. When you appreciate that person or that source, you're just going to get more of it. That's abundance. It's appreciating what you have, and then the universe provides more to you. And it's about being grateful and being in the present moment with what you have, and allowing more of that to come to you. Yeah, it's not about asking for things that you don't have, or praying for things. I don't, yeah, I don't think that works, honestly.
Well, and I think of it from if you look at it just from almost a frequency basis, sometimes when we're praying for something, we're connecting more to the feeling of fear of not having it. And then
Yes,
I think we're almost
that's right.
amplifying that. So you want to get clear with what it is that you're even putting out, I think, in the first place with it as best as we can.
Yes,
Rebecca,
yes.
how do we specifically work with the nervous system part? What gets stuck in the nervous system when we're dealing with things like fear and trauma? And then how do we start to heal that? So
Hmm.
practically speaking with the nervous system, what are some specific things that people can even explore?
Yeah. So, I talk in the book about different tools and practices to regulate your nervous system. Some people are in high sympathetic charge, or what we call hyperactivation. That it often shows up as anxiety, anytime you're speaking quickly or moving quickly, you're likely to be outside of what we call this window of resilience, where you have a good balance between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. No one stays in that sweet spot all the time where you can think and feel simultaneously and you're fully present with whatever's happening. But you can learn to practice staying in that window of resilience if you start to notice yourself outside of it. So, am I talking faster? Am I behaving quickly? Am I moving too quickly? On the weekends, am I sleeping in too much because I'm so exhausted from the week? You're probably in high sympathetic charge, too much anxiety in your system. And then what happens is that what we call the gas in your nervous system, or the sympathetic charge, you've been up in that high state of hyperactivation for too long, and your system's going to shut down. And that shutdown is hypoactivation, tends to show up as depression, numbness, inability to say no to things. Like you're just overwhelmed and shut down, right? Disconnected from your body. It's also freeze. The sympathetic is fight and flight, right? So how do you regulate your nervous system? Well, the first thing is to start a breath work practice. That's the simplest way to start. And I like to tell people to use their hands, to place a hand on your heart space and a hand on your belly, tip your chin down a little bit so that the medial prefrontal cortex can start to notice what's happening inside the body. And then just track your breath. That is the best place to start. Can I notice my breathing? Step one. Can I notice my heart beating? Can I feel my feet on the ground? If you can feel a sensation in your body somewhere below your shoulders is ideal, then you're present. It's that simple. I am present when I notice a sensation in my body. That's the place to start, is to just breathe into your body and slow down. Nice long in breath through the nose, nice long out breath through the mouth. Notice gravity on the out breath. Notice something holding you. Notice something holding you, and then connect to either your sit bones in the chair or your feet on the ground. Something that tells you I am here. Some sensation below the shoulders. And that's sort of the start of regulation, just to start there.
It's one of those things that's really so simple and with you all the time. It always makes me appreciate the human body and what we are so much more, because we really do have so many of these tools innately there that we can access, like that if we want to.
Yeah.
It reminds me, I remember one of Pema Chodron, and she would talk about a fear exercise. And she actually said the F stood for feel it in your body. The E stood for embrace the feeling, because a lot of times we don't like it, so we try to push it away. So it's like, let it in and hold it. And the A said allow the thoughts to dissolve. So you just stay just in the body with sensation. And that was kind of the bread and butter of it, so to speak. And then once that starts to dissolve, then the R was the idea of remember the millions of others that are going through something similar. And that this suffering that we go through has a way of either creating more suffering, or it can actually it can cause separation, or it can cause more people to come together. And so it's through that suffering that we actually can connect more.
That's right.
It was really beautiful practice.
But you do have to move through it. You can't bypass it or skip it, or, I have this, if we have time, I have this quick analogy that I like to use.
Yeah.
So, So if you can imagine society in a big boat on the ocean, and everybody's hanging out in the boat. We have different levels in the boat. So some people like to be at the top of the boat, middle of the boat, front or the back. We're all on this big boat together. And at the upper layers of the ocean are all of the emotions we don't want to feel: shame, grief, anger, our traumas, all of the fears that we hold in ourselves. Most people don't even want to dip their toes in the water. Ooh, I don't want to feel that. Shame? Ooh, no, I don't want to feel that. I don't want to feel anger. No, I don't want to feel any of that. I'm just going to stay in the boat. But what you do by staying in the boat is that you limit your ability to grow, to learn, and to experience exponential joy You have to move through the hard stuff first. You got to jump in the water. You got to have the courage to jump in that water and swim in the mess of our emotions. And once you've swum in that mess for long enough, what happens next is you can go down, 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 way below where the light hits. We are in the depths of the ocean at that place. You have to have courage to move through all of that to get what I call soul level love. When we can experience love at the soul level, and that soul level doesn't require me to know you, doesn't require me to know the other people in this world in order for me to love you, because the love at that level connects all of us. It's a level of love that only is given to those who have the courage to jump in, to be fearless, to not avoid the hard parts of life. And that's when you get back to what I call your original blueprint. It's the purest expression of the human's body connected to the soul. That original blueprint is down there. So you got to jump in.
I love that analogy, Rebecca. I think that's beautiful. And I think so true. You know, we talked once to um, Alexander Lowen's son, who is the founder of bioenergetics, and we talked to his son, and he was talking about just our capacity to feel the most intense of the painful emotions, then equally allows us to feel the extent of the joyous and the
Yes.
feel-good emotions. And
Yes.
we tend to not want to do almost either one of them.
Right.
And we end up sort of living this
That's right.
mediocre sort of existence because we're not allowing the full capacity, the full expression of who we are.
That's right. And what I always say is if we can get away from assigning labels to our emotions, good and bad, unpleasant, pleasant, it's just energy. That let's try to normalize that emotion is just energy in the body. And you can move through any of those. You don't be afraid to feel your shame because it has consequences when you don't.
Yeah, very true.
Hmm.
Rebecca, you also talked specifically about and you've come to it a couple times around the importance of community, the importance of a village.
Yeah.
Where do you start with people? Because I know there's some people that you know already feel alone. They already feel abandoned or alone. Even
Mm-hmm.
the idea of connecting, they don't even know how to connect or where to connect.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you start with that for people that are probably even know that there's an important part around that, the importance of community, but they don't really know where to begin with that? Where do you suggest for people to navigate that part of it?
Well, what I would say is that the first relationship you want to start with is yourself. Like if we connect with this part of us, you are the only person you're going to know from birth to death. No one else is going to know you that long besides you. So you want to marry yourself first. I give people an exercise to write the vows to themselves so that that emptiness inside gets filled. We want to fill most of that emptiness inside ourselves so that when we go out into the world, we can connect with people in healthy ways. We're not asking them to fulfill all the emptiness inside us, right? But what I would say to you is the best place to start is your neighborhood. Who's somebody in your life who's in close proximity to you that you want to get to know better? Pick one person. Pick one person or an activity that you love to do. I'll give you my example now that we're coming out of COVID. What I really want to do is take a dancing class. I want to take West Coast swing. And I think it's the best thing to do because you get your exercise, you get a social time with new people, and you're laughing. You can get to make mistakes and experiment, do things, and feel some joy in your body. I think that is the best combination. If you can do something that engages your body, that engages other people, and makes you laugh, and that repetition of that exposure to that, whoever that group is going to give you your new posse of people.
Nice. And you get to
Yeah.
have fun and shake it
And
out a little bit.
fun.
I
Yeah.
actually did East Coast swing for a while back when I
Did
was in
you?
school, almost like over 20 years ago. I did
Yeah.
that with a partner at the time. And then we actually came out to Vancouver and we went and we went to a club that did West Coast swing and it was actually
Yeah.
quite different, but
Yeah.
they added in a little bit of East Coast swing to kind of mix it up too. So, oh,
Yeah.
that'll be good. That'll be a fun one.
Yeah. Something that
Um,
moves your body would be great.
yeah, absolutely. In closing here, I'm wondering if you can share just you two talk about some of the rituals and the exercises, and you got a whole section in your book where it breaks down a lot of these different processes for people.
Mm,
What are a couple of the ones that you've found to be really valuable, either for yourself or some of the different
mm.
clients you've worked with that
Yeah.
people might be able to even start to explore right now? And then I would recommend to get into the book because it really walks you through these things, but that people could
Yes.
begin.
Yes, great question. And I'll just add to that and say that a lot of these practices are not just in the book, but some of them are demonstrated on my website so people can, or in audio. So all of that information is going to be out there for people to not only read it, but to listen to it, to see it. So I'm trying to sort of engage all different learning styles in the way that people learn. But I would say at the top of the list is a practice that actually Dr. Peter Levine developed from somatic experiencing, who's the founder. And he developed what we call the VOO breathing method, VOO. And what that method does is it vibrates your entire vagus nerve, everything from the social part of your nervous system, all the muscles in your face and your ears, your nose, your throat, your brainstem. That's your brainstem is what connects the social part to your nervous system, all the way down through the lungs and the heart. And what I call all of your flushing organs are all connected to the vagus nerve, which I get into detail in the book. But that VOO sound, the vibration of that VOO sound vibrates the entire body, all those organs that are connected to the vagus nerve. So that VOO breathing method is a bottoms up intervention that settles the nervous system, sends the message to the amygdala that you're safe. And then what I tell people on that, the last, so you do maybe 3 or 4 of the VOO breathing method practice, and then I've added a piece, which is now that I've got my access to my higher order thinking brain, that also means I have access to my language center. So I'm going to use language to send the message back down to the body using a very simple mantra. I am safe. You repeat that mantra on the out breath at whisper level volume, sending that message back down to the body, which seals the relationship between the body and the mind.
That is a great exercise. I remember doing that one with Dr. Levine as well.
Yeah.
And this is one we actually do with our kids still fairly
Mm.
regular, just as literally like a self-regulatory
Yes.
technique. And sometimes we'll
It's
go
great to
from
start
VU.
that. I was going to say, it's also great to start VOO breathing when you're in your 3rd trimester of a pregnancy,
Hmm.
because that's when the regulation starts.
If we
Yeah.
decide to have another one, I'll keep you posted on that.
Okay, great.
But
I'm
yeah,
sorry, I didn't mean
it's
to cut you off.
no, that's great though. But it's a good
Yeah.
one to do with like your kids too, because a lot of times, even when your kids or they're picking up on your own stuff. So when you kind of settle your own nervous system, you're going to see your kids respond very quickly before you have to worry about theirs. But
Yeah.
we can do this all together, and then you can even play with humming and finding and sort of synchronizing
Singing.
your hums and stuff like that
Yes.
too. And
Yes.
it becomes a fun game that you can start to play as a family.
Yes. Yeah.
Sometimes we've even done that when one of them has been upset and we'll kind of start to voo or we'll start to hum and then someone else will jump in and eventually everybody's sort of forgot what they were worried about and getting into this humming choir together trying to
Exactly.
harmonize.
Yeah.
So
Makes sense because
simple
it's some
things, you know?
settling. Yeah. It's all settling. That's
Yeah.
good. Yeah. I love that.
That was wonderful, Rebecca. I really appreciate being able to go through all of the things. I think those are really helpful for people. uh, Rebecca's book goes into way more detail on all of this stuff, and there's a whole, literally half the book, I think, goes into a lot of different exercises and feedback. You know, what I like about your book too is you're constantly getting people to check back in on themselves, ask themselves what's changed, what's different.
Mhm.
I think that's really important because it's letting them connect back to their body sensation and their body wisdom. So I think that's such a valuable piece to get people to reflect after everything that they do.
Yeah, and that question that I ask after every exercise or ritual, what's different, is deliberate, because when we notice what's different, what happens is inside is that you're rewiring new neural pathways. You're establishing new neural pathways in your brain and new neurophysiology in your body. So that system is, over time, it's not only regenerating, but it's actually a new system. That system is relating to itself and others in a completely and entirely different way. So
Hmm.
it's very important to notice. We have to notice. That's part of the changing of those pathways.
Yeah, absolutely. The
Mm.
awareness of it is sort of what solidifies it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Rebecca, where can people learn more about the work you're doing?
Mm.
Any events that you've got upcoming, where people can get your book, all of that?
Yes. So the book is available on Amazon, and it's going live June 7th, 2022. And you can also go to my website, IRIS institute.com, for more information about all of these, including upcoming events in the fall.
Wonderful. We will have all those in the show notes and people can check all that stuff up. Rebecca, what an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
I will.